The Halaltrip podcast.
Assalamualaikum and welcome to another episode of the Halaltrip podcast. You're listening to me, Rauda, and Nurul. Today is a rather special episode because we have a superstar in the Tuxedo Nola. Okay, so he is here because of his podcast called King of the World.
Nice.
Okay. This podcast has been nominated twice this year in the Ambies Award.
What's it? Is it like Grammys?
Almost.
Oscars?
If you change in tuxedo, it will be almost Grammys.
Okay. So less
But,
formal.
Yes. Smart casual.
Smart
cocktail.
casual version, okay.
Okay. The Ambies are a series of awards given to the podcast industry, and our guest here has been nominated for two categories: the best podcast host and the best production sound.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate
As you can
it.
hear, his voice is crisp. Okay, before we start, I want to introduce you guys. So again, Shahjehan is here as the voice behind King of the World. So King of the World is a new podcast, an award-winning podcast, exploring his life as a Pakistani American Muslim in the 20 years since 9/11. So in this podcast, they talk about mental health, they talk about addiction, and of course, family history, after that incident.
Yeah, so how do I pronounce your name? Shahjehan?
Shahjehan, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, so with your experience as a creative professional, your podcast is so highly produced and it's very impressive actually. It's sort of like you watching you're listening to a movie with all the sound effects. It's as though you're like there with you as you tell your story. So I was just wondering, like, do you remember how you first started and like how did it came about, like you coming into the podcast industry?
So thank you so much for those kind words about the show. That's exactly what we were hoping, that it would sound like a well-produced movie. So I cannot take credit for that portion. So it's not just me. So I work for a media company called Rifelion Media, which was started by my childhood friend, and we both grew up in the same Pakistani community of uncles and aunties here in the Boston area. His name is Asad Butt. He started this company, Rifelion Media. So King of the World was our basically first big project. It was a big risk, that he sort of quit his job to do media stuff full time. He also kind of asked me like, hey, I have this crazy idea to start this media company. Do you think like maybe you would want to host a show? So neither of us had any real experience at all. So we just really lucked out. We hired a really great team, of folks that definitely some folks that Asad had known for a while, and then we also had, so the team itself was about 5 to 7 people. So the sound design, specifically the portion that we got nominated for, was Mark Anato, who's based out in Los Angeles. He's more of like a seasoned podcasting professional, and he really helped polish the audio and make it sound the way it did. But as far as how I personally got into podcasting, it was literally in November of 2020, when Asad was like, hey man, do you want to do a podcast? So my background is more in music and performance and acting. And I do have, some voiceover, other stuff that I've done. Like I'd done an audio book. I've been doing some commercial and industrial, like corporate voiceover gigs for a long time. But when it came to actually scripting and producing a whole series, I had zero experience. So I was, terrified, but in a good way once we got started. And we basically we kind of figured it out as we went along, like we sat down and we thought, there were different stages when you plan a project like this. I'm not sure how much experience you guys have with production, but yeah, it just kind of came in stages. But yeah, so the answer is I don't. I have basically 1 year of podcasting experience.
But I do feel like there is a very big difference between like podcasts here in Asia versus like in America. Because when I was looking through the nominees for the Ambies Award, they were all like very well produced. Like you have the SFX, you have the good illustration, and you will see people on it. But when it comes to like podcast in this region, it's more casual and like we're talking like this. Whereas
we have that too, right? So we definitely have more like interview style shows. So actually, Asad technically started the company out with just sort of a test thing, like an interview style show called American Muslim Project, where he would just have guests on and that he would produce and edit himself. So yeah, that stuff, honestly, it comes down to the time and money, you know, and budget.
Yeah.
So, you know, luckily we were fortunate to have, you know, a small, but we did have a budget. But yeah, that's kind of, and I'm not sure, I've never been to, and you're based in Singapore, correct?
Yep.
Correct.
So
correct.
yeah. But yeah, there's a whole, you know, I'm learning the same thing. There's this whole world of like audio drama, you know, I've done some of that too now. And so, yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
nice.
I think 2020 was an interesting year.
That's true.
That was
Yeah.
like COVID, right? And I think everyone
Right.
kind of retreated to podcasts.
That's
Actually, that was the same year we
Yeah.
started our podcast.
Yes.
Mm.
I remember
Okay, so you
our
started in
first-
2020.
Yeah,
correct,
yeah.
Our
So-
first episode, we rented out this room,
A studio.
a studio, a very, very small studio. It was literally I don't know, how many feet? 5 feet.
It's pretty compact.
It's very compact. And like we were all just crammed in one couch and they were like
But they
had-
taking turns to
They
watch.
had, because they had 2 mics and there's 3 of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, mine looks very fancy. I'm in my closet right now, so I'm in a very tiny. I put foam and stuff around, you know, to make it look fancy. But I am literally sitting in my closet. Usually, when I come in here to do this is where I did all the narration for King of the World.
Wow.
Half of it belongs to my wife, so her stuff is on one side. The other half, I usually just take out my clothes when it's time for me to record and then put them back. So it's very.
I'm just thinking like, I'm gonna be in my studio, and then he walks into the closet.
Why is your wife with her clothes, you know? just opens the door.
Yeah.
Very cool.
We have a couple of them, so it's kind of like the excess. This is our excess dressy clothes are in this. This is in the other room. So we live in a small apartment here in Boston. So
You do what you have to do for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I mean, I think that's one thing that I've learned, that, you know, as much as we did have the sound design and the polishing, like there's a lot you can do in a we call it DIY. I'm not sure if you guys have that same expression, do it yourself, right? So yeah, I mean, it's all you can do a lot like by yourself, and you can learn a lot, but it obviously it helps when you have like a team to clean up the audio and things like that. So
Yes,
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, so Hazira initially was giving a summary about your show, about that your show talks about the mental health, addiction, as well as family history, right? During 9/11 and even the experiences as a Muslim after 9/11 in America. So how did that idea of King of the World, maybe you can share with us, what do you aim to achieve through this podcast?
Sure, yeah. So when my business partner Asad first approached me to do this show and to do a show because 2021 was the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I was initially, honestly, very hesitant because I did not want to, what I felt like, again, and I think maybe a lot of Muslims feel, I don't know if you can relate to this, to center this narrative of Islam with terrorism, with 9/11, with all just the awful stuff in the world. You know what I mean? So my initial thing, I said no. I believe that I don't want to do that, and I don't want to talk about 9/11. I don't ever want to think about 9/11 again, because the crux of the show is that I was a senior in high school when it happened. I was about to turn 18. I was a month away from turning 18. And and each episode sort of goes sequentially through the last 20 years, and kind of side by side has my story, which I narrate with the help of my friends, my family, my like high school teacher, and then we also talk to actors, historians, and other people along the way, including a Muslim mental health professional in episode 7. But we just kind of go year by year and put the two things side by side. But what we sort of, the way that when we initially started talking about it, what we realized was that whether I like it or not, and whether maybe a lot of us like it or not, it was the defining moment of our lives. Like it was, you know, for those of you that maybe weren't around when it happened, or it's too long ago, like it was a literal, like overnight, everything changed. So when we realized that if we approached it from the coming of age, I don't want to say angle, but if we thought of, because that's literally what it was, like my own coming of age into adulthood story, that it was such a thing that defined that's when like the sort of light bulbs started going off in our head that, you know, maybe there's something here. So like, you know, the first step that we took was to just make like a Google document of like, okay, every year, you know, 2001, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 2021, what was happening in the world, column 1, what was happening in Shahjehan's life, column 2. And, you know, since I have had a pretty for me, a pretty standard, normal life, but maybe not for of other people. I've been touring in a band, I've done all sorts of things, and I've had struggles with addiction and mental health and all these things that to me were just so like, yeah, was just my life. My producer was like, wait, all of this stuff actually happened to you? Like, maybe we should talk about it, and like maybe it would be interesting to people. And honestly, like, we just wanted to make one decent episode that we were proud of. And I can safely say that we made a whole series, which is fantastic. And the feedback that we've gotten is really like the stuff that's kind of blown our minds in a way. And I think that you can say that we made this perhaps for one or a specific community in mind. Like maybe, other, let's say, American Muslims or other even, quote unquote South Asians or Pakistanis or whatever it was. But what ended up happening is it related because we treated it as a coming of age complete story of like a person, it hit sort of all aspects of my life, and different people related to it for different reasons, like non-Muslims who went through addiction stuff could relate to it, or just Americans that grew up around that time, who were just whatever. So like it really and it did touch this story that has been told in just this one way and in this one light in a very different way. So that's kind of something that we've realized and we're really, really proud of.
I mean, it is a really great series, I would say. It really covers everything.
Yeah, and it's not an easy subject to talk about, I think. So I think the fact that you portray it in a way that's also delicate, but also in a way that resonates with a lot of American Muslims, I think that's what appeals to a lot of the positive feedback I've received.
Yeah. So what is it like growing up in America? I think it's something that we don't see often. I have to admit though, whenever I see a Muslim in an American shop, like, Muslim, girl in hijab. Like, but what is it like for you to grow up in America?
So, and now I'll talk about my specific experience, which is something that I tried to emphasize over and over again, that it was just one particular story. So my story is one of, being the second generation, well, I guess technically I can never remember if it's first or second. Like I think first generation born in this country, right?
Yeah.
So my parents immigrated from Pakistan in the 70s. So they ended up in a very homogenous white town in the suburbs of Massachusetts.
Right.
So for me, my experience was one of this, and a lot of first generation people speak of this duality of existence, right? Like where you're trying to maybe figure out how much of your maybe your family's culture is you're trying to hold on to, and what, if you're going to quote unquote assimilate to or whatever. So for me, and it's not always the case, right? That there's this like bifurcation or something in somebody's identity. Like we did have a very active kind of Pakistani Muslim community on the weekends, that we would hang out with. But for me, I had a lot of trouble reconciling those two different pieces, and they sort of, it was tough for me. And now, again, like that's one Pakistani American Islam, right? Which is very different from, like, let's say a city like New York, where you have people from all over the world. So obviously you have Muslims from all over the world. You have masjids, that are essentially like folks from all across the planet. So that type of Islam also exists in the U.S., but like for me, in my particular setting, I had one sort of one community in school and one community kind of on the weekends type thing. So again, I can speak to what that was like growing up, and also in the series I sort of talk about expanding that a little bit once I left high school and kind of like meeting other, and because I was like kind of a problem kid, doing a lot of quote unquote bad things like drinking and smoking and dealing with drugs and stuff, and finding my way into music rather than focusing on, school and education like my parents had hoped I would. I ended up meeting a lot of other people, and then eventually starting this band that would take me kind of like all around, but at the same time also struggling with all these mental health things, and always at the center of it dealing with these questions of identity. which is one, which is a very central, I think, thesis in this podcast, is this concept of identity.
And like now, I don't know if it's now, but do you ever find yourself being able to, just combine all of that into one person, or is it still a constant struggle to be so different to different communities?
So that's a great question, and the interesting thing about actually doing this podcast itself was a very therapeutic experience for me, because I think I personally, and I think maybe people can see it this way too, but like it's something that it sort of evolves. It doesn't, hopefully it's just something you have a different relationship. You grow as a person, many different ways through many different ages of your life. But for a long time, it was like sort of like anxiety about, I'm too many different things. I can't be this cohesive person. But later in life, and really after doing this show, having it out there, realizing that like actually all of these little things that were about me that were broken are actually just parts of who I am, and that's like okay. So I think it's only a little bit later in life, and honestly probably more so in the last year, that I've really been able to come to terms with all of it. And it's, I don't know, for me it's not something that's like consistent day to day. It kind of like goes up and down, and I don't know if that's more of like a first generation thing. I'm assuming, I don't know, I don't want to assume anything about you, but you guys were like raised in Singapore, and you were born in Singapore. So and I've actually never been there, so again, I don't want to like assume how things are at all, but some of my family in Pakistan has been to that part of the world. So
I would say in Singapore, how I say I don't want to say there's equal people, or like equal like macam Muslims here, Chinese there, or Indians. I wouldn't say that, but I would say luckily, or like thankfully, we live in a place where there isn't much disconnection from different races. Yeah, so I guess that is good in some way, I think. Yeah.
But
yeah,
when it comes to
I go ahead.
But when it comes
Sorry,
to
I didn't mean to.
identity, you were talking about, I guess in Singapore, we are a secular country. So when it comes to our own religion, we practice it on our own accord. It's sort of like, for me personally, I can speak for myself, that there is a distinct difference between how I am acting in the working world versus like how I am at home. So it seems like it's also very difficult for me to integrate my spirituality and religion and my faith into my day-to-day. So I think I relate to what you have said as well. Maybe it's slightly different from where you grew up in, since being a Pakistani in America must have been difficult for you, especially since you grew up in Massachusetts, where everyone is different from you, right? Yeah.
Again, not everyone, like I grew up in a very homogenous part of Massachusetts. There are, different more. So yeah.
I see.
For sure.
So what would you say? Would you say that, I don't know, I don't know if I'm assuming, but then like,
That's
would you
okay.
say that the situation now is better, or is it worse in the past, ever since 9/11, or has this 20 years has been slightly better for Muslims in general?
So that's people ask that question a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I hate to say that, it's complicated, but the truth is, yes, it is. In some ways. So I think we actually talk about this a little bit in episode either 3 or 4, whichever episode is about representation in the media, for example. Things have changed a lot, right? Like the popular culture just looks a lot different now than it did when I was in high school, for example. Even the idea of like us, me being on like a Muslim podcast or something would be pretty like I don't think I could have ever imagined that when I was in high school. In some but it's also like we just had Donald Trump as our president, right? So things are still not great in a lot of ways. Honestly, like on the one hand, yes, there's all this, media out there. Like you can almost create, a lot of us that didn't have voices before do. But at the same time, like, it's kind of up to you to choose which voice you're going to listen to in a way. Like you can essentially create your own, you can curate your own social life, your own, even your own like news now.
True.
So in that sense, I mean, I don't want to be a total like bummer, but like, in terms of the whole like the fact versus fiction thing, or things are tougher in certain ways. But I think that, so I think it depends on which lens you're sort of asking the question in. Like, because obviously, yeah, like for somebody like me to have a show like this and to be nominated, with basically some of the biggest, for example, podcasts that exist in this country is a huge deal. And maybe that wouldn't have happened a long time ago. Just what was it, 2 days ago, the trailer for the new Miss Marvel superhero thing dropped, which is like about a Pakistani girl from New Jersey. I don't think that could have happened 20 years ago, even maybe 5 years ago. So depending on which barometer you're looking, and I'm not saying that like pop culture is everything at all, but it is that stuff is a big deal, because pop culture sort of defines culture in the way that people look like us. But I think that challenges will be there sort of like no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's hard to just, I guess what I'm trying to say is it's hard to think of things in a binary.
Yeah. I mean,
I hope that wasn't a non-answer.
We were expecting a not straightforward answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I definitely feel like there's a lot more representation now. And I feel like, especially for younger girls or younger boys, representation is really important, to see a hijabi in the high school, to know that she can actually live that life is really important, I think. So, yeah, honestly, I just want to ask, right? I don't know if it's just me, but I get a lot of questions when it comes to like Ramadan, for example. Okay, this episode is going to come out after Eid. So Ramadan just passed. And do you often get questions like, oh, why do you fast? Or like, you don't get to eat or drink? Those kind of questions. Do you
I think I
those?
definitely used to when I was a kid in, I remember in, so the other thing is, so my mom actually used to come into school and talk about, my mom was essentially like the model minority mom who would come in and talk about Islam, and and talk about like, why is my kid not eating or this and that. And so in that way, and for her, it was helpful to sort of be that representative. And obviously, like, I think, there's a lot of problems with trying to represent a whole whatever. But like, for my mom, that's kind of like what empowered her, what gave her a sense of purpose and stuff, to kind of like be like, look, like I'm a Pakistani Muslim, and like I'm living in this town, and I just want to like educate you about like what our cultures are. So she would come in on, we would dress up and stuff, and like come in on Eid and talk to all the like kids. And honestly, like recently after doing this, after this show came out, I reconnected with a lot of folks from high school and even elementary school that I hadn't talked to in 20, 30 years. And one of them told this story about like, my mom's name is Tina. She was like, when Tina used to come in, I still remember like she would talk about Eid and stuff. And that was their exposure to Islam. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think I also feel like for Tina herself as an immigrant, I think it takes a lot of guts to just, own her identity, in an environment where everyone
and she is
from you.
I will say that Tina is one of, mostly between her and probably my youngest sister Shahjehan, they're people's favorite characters on this podcast. Because, and I actually, Tina just had her own, I also co-host this other show now called Immigrantly, and we just had her as a guest. Her episode just came out 2 days ago, and she talked about the topic of arranged marriage. So she probably deserves her own show. She's such a
We're gonna be
captivating
listening to the episode
presence.
after this.
Please do. Yeah,
She's making money. Let's go.
Yeah, not just because she's my mom, but it's a really, really, it's a great episode.
So in one of your episodes, you talk about imposter syndrome, right? And
Yes,
basically, imposter syndrome is the internal experience of believing that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. And I think that's something that a lot of people is experiencing. How do you overcome that?
Ooh, wow, that's a great question. I mean, I think there's different. It just again over time, I've learned different coping skills. Especially, I would say, as like a quote unquote creative person,
Mm.
this is something that it just happens. Like even after this podcast came out, like it did really well, and obviously from there it goes to, oh my God, what am I going to do next?
Yeah, you have to
What
always
could I
update
possibly
yourself.
Yeah, what could I possibly do that could be better than this, or not even better, or that could meet, or like, yeah, and that's happened with, with music, like every album I've ever put out, every musical project I've ever been a part of. It's just, it's this thing inside that, I think it's been long enough now that what I can say is that, and especially with, after getting sober and stuff, like realizing that, like, you know what, that's going to happen. And when I'm in that space mentally, it's almost this like trick you got to kind of play with yourself to be like, to almost like outthink the voice, because the voice is there, and it is very real, and it's doing it on purpose, just negating everything that you're saying and thinking, and essentially telling, for me, I'm talking about me, like it's just telling me that I'm worthless and that like everything I've done is useless and I should have been a doctor or whatever. And but yeah, it's just being like, you know what? Okay, this always happens. I will feel this way for now. It's usually between 24 and 48 hours. So I'm just gonna give myself a break.
Yep.
If I can't do anything, I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just gonna like exercise and just veg out or like whatever it takes. And then, because I know that when it's time for me to show up, or when the next burst of creativity comes, or when I get that next project, I will show up and I will do it because I have a proven track record. But it's hard. I can't say that I have magically found the cure, or that, if I if I meditate for, this amount of time every day, or I make sure to, follow my diet and exercise regimen, that I'll, so it's just something that comes and goes. And also same with anxiety and depression and stuff. Like, yeah, I still am somebody that goes through that, pretty regularly. It's just learning to live with it, and realizing that that's one part of those like different identities, which is just kind of makes you who you are. Because the other side is true too, because like that's how, as a creative person, I get to feel some of the highs,
Yeah.
as well. So
Yep.
Yeah, I was just wondering regarding imposter syndrome, right? I'm not too familiar with imposter syndrome, but as a minority, do you feel that if you were to gain some accolades, that you don't deserve it because it's just like a token representation in a way? Is that
that's a great point, actually. And that's something that, I would say that I felt that before. And I think that's actually a product of white supremacy, right? In this, at least the way that I understand it is to just be like, and essentially even like with my own story, to be like, you know what am I going to say about 9/11 that could matter? Like, why does my story matter? Why does anything? Yeah. So I think, just like, it probably just adds another layer to everything. For sure. That's a really good point, actually.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've struggled with myself, actually, because I grew up in a education system where everyone was different from me. I came from, because I'm brown, right? And everyone else was Chinese. So it was very difficult for me to integrate into that society. So I had to sort of like blend in a way. And I thought that whatever accolades that I do achieve, it was because I was a minority and they just needed to get that percent.
Fill some kind of quota or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it has brought me, it has still been living inside of me, and that inner critic still comes out at certain points in time.
Yes.
But I agree with you, actually. It's like a learning journey, and every single day you have to shut the inner critic down, right? Yeah.
You
Sometimes
do,
it wins, but most of the time I win. Yeah.
Didn't we tell you that you are worth it?
No, it has to come from you yourself. It doesn't have to.
It can't come from your parents. It can't even come from your therapist. Honestly, it has to come from inside. Yeah, I really feel that. Yeah.
Talking about therapy and how I think you mentioned that in episode 7, you have a Muslim therapist.
Muslim health professional.
Muslim health professional.
Yes.
So I've been wondering, like, is it important, let's say if I want to go to therapy, is it important for me to seek help from someone who is, knowledgeable in Islamic studies so that I can always relate back to my religion? Or is it actually completely two different things, therapy and Islamic studies?
That's a really great question. Let me approach it like this. So I had a couple of just, I'll call them run-of-the-mill normal white American therapists, when I was a kid. And, I did learn a great deal from them. And I talk about this in the show as well. But one thing that I realized a little bit later when I kind of purposely sought out, and I didn't seek out, a brown therapist. I basically just sought out essentially my only, I went on psychologytoday.com, right? And I just checked off the boxes for like therapist is non-white. Or not even non-white, that speaks, I wanted them to at least understand the languages I grew up speaking. So that was my only qualm. And the person I ended up getting myself she actually didn't grow up Muslim, but she was herself an immigrant from India. But she just understood enough about some of the like cultural stuff that I didn't have to like explain too much. Like I didn't have to talk about my parents' arranged, like my first therapist was really quite obsessed with that, arranged marriage thing. And I mean, and again, not to like whatever, but it's just for him, I realized later on that maybe it was a bit of the whole clash of civilizations thing, and you're too close to your mom or to your dad, which is actually very normal in our culture, So I don't know I don't think necessarily it's like, you're Muslim, you have to have a Muslim therapist, right? I think that it's more about your comfort, because finding a therapist is hard enough as it is, number one. But I do think that after having the experience of someone that understands like some of that like basic otherness stuff is helpful. I felt for me, like as someone who had a therapist, a white therapist, but then also when I started getting treatment for addiction stuff, going to, 12-step recovery meetings, for example, that were overwhelmingly white, where people like didn't want to talk about race because it was too political or whatever. That was later on, I realized that stuff was kind of harmful.
So you say that, so I think if you could explain to us or share with us, what is the advantage of having a Muslim or a brown therapist in that sense? I'm sure that you don't have to explain it or whatever, but do you have experiences working with them, and like how are they significantly different from other therapists that you know?
Sure. So I mean, I'll give you two examples. So for example, so I did get, as I mentioned, Indian American therapist, and just right away, she could understand some of the language, when I felt like maybe speaking in Urdu, or for her Hindi, she could understand some of the family stuff. So I didn't have to focus as much on like the family, because by this point, so I'm talking about, so I would be in my mid-30s when I started going to this. I'd taken a long time off of therapy. And then I went back to really kind of, because I had been in recovery now. I'd been sober for 5, 6, 7 years. And I still was kind of, whatever, unhappy, unfulfilled with career stuff, and trying to figure out like how much of my creative life I wanted to pursue and this and that. So it was just very helpful to have her there to understand. And also because, I was newly married, and I am in like a interracial, my partner is white, and to help me sort of navigate some of that stuff, some of the like, maybe some of the like unresolved issues there about, like maybe leftover guilt, for maybe not marrying like a Muslim person or whatever, even though it's like, my parents are fine with it or whatever, So in that sense, it was helpful to have someone that was not approaching things from a fact-finding curiosity kind of way versus just someone who has that experience.
True. I mean, I definitely understand, like a lot of things are very gray. Like I feel good here, but at the same time I feel this kind of bad feeling, and then I don't like this, but at the same time I also like this. So I definitely understand where you're coming from. So you talked about being addicted to alcoholism. alcoholism?
So yeah, mainly actually it was cannabis. So marijuana smoking or whatever you guys call it was
How
like my main thing. Yeah.
how did you feel when you first, needed to tell someone?
Yeah, so I mean the first times when it was, honestly was like my parents finding out about it. The first time I got caught versus the first time I actually realized I had a problem versus the first time I actually like sat my parents down. And I go into detail about in the pod in I think episode 2 of the podcast about this about my then I had I had suicide attempts, so I ended up in the hospital. Um and after that was when I really, really kind of came clean to my folks. But that was as difficult as it was the first step in just vocalizing this
Yep.
kind of stuff. And honestly, since that moment, although it's kind of been a little bit like this to where I am now, like a roller coaster in a way, I have at least found, and a lot of us, I think, in recovery find that like just talking about stuff is so much
Yeah.
better. I just talked to my mom last week, and she said they are now starting to have this mental health group at our masjid, which is something that blows my mind, and she's someone who is at the
Mm.
forefront of that stuff in those
Yeah.
discussions, and she's been pushing for it for such a long time. I have, yeah, go Tina.
Go Tina.
And,
Go
since I started going through stuff way back when, once I started to get better, I became somebody that other people could sort of look up to and know, and ask, I try to make myself available to all sorts of people that like want to talk about stuff, but especially when it comes to like Pakistani kids or Muslim kids or whatever
Yep.
who are struggling with this, like they sort of know that like Shahjehan is the one that like, you can talk to him about any of this kind of stuff. So
It's really nice. It's really nice. That must have been really nice to be able to talk to someone. I
yeah,
think it's something that not everyone understands. I think if you keep thinking of your problem
yes,
internally, it will soon consume you, and you have all
yeah,
these implications in your head, like something's gonna go wrong, whatever. But as
hmm,
soon as you release it out or like you share your problem, I think you at least have someone else
yeah,
to.
yeah, or just even to just listen, yeah, and I've told my story also at the masjid a few times, and yeah, so it's been pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it could be like an old stereotypical way to always relate mental health problem with the Quran. And like, oh, if you're having any depression, just pray.
Just
Just
pray,
read
just say this
Quran.
prayer, this
Yeah.
and that, yeah,
And that doesn't really solve the issue as a whole. I think it needs
right,
to be supported with like talks and affirmations, from people so that, you just get a bit more confident, I guess. I don't know.
yeah,
Mm.
absolutely,
But yes, guys, if you haven't listened to King of the World,
Mhm.
please go ahead and listen on Spotify. It's an amazing production, I would
Mhm.
say amazing, and good luck to
Your
the
thank you
Ambies
so much.
squad.
yeah.
Honestly, if we're just I know people always say this, but like really, we cannot. The Ambies were they're two big awards that we applied to many, but the Ambies and the Webbies are the two that we were like, there's no way in hell that this would ever, just we'll pretend, we'll just do it, like not thinking that we would have ever stood a chance. So I still remember getting that notification. I was in my car in the parking lot of the gym just a few weeks ago, and I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And then, and then I couldn't even deal with it. And then I just ran into the gym and started working out. And then Asan was like, did you see who were nominated with? And I was like, no. He's like, dude, it's NPR, it's all the big podcasts. And we
Yeah.
could not, so we still can't believe it.
Inshallah, you guys
Yeah.
can do it.
Thank you
Alright,
so
guys.
much. Thank you so
And
much for having me.
all right, nice. So if you haven't listened to the King of the World, we will include the link in our description box below. So do go ahead and click it. And I think you have other podcasts as well, right?
Yeah,
Immigrantly.
so I'm co-hosting season 13 of this show called Immigrantly, which is also a fantastic show. This season is on love and relationships of all different kinds, and my mom talks about arranged marriage. It's a pretty awesome episode, and
Yes.
yeah, we've got a bunch of other projects coming up this year as well.
Nice.
Yes. So go ahead and click all of them below in the description box. If you haven't listened to our past episodes, go ahead and listen. But in the meantime, thank you guys. Bye-bye and Eid Mubarak.
Bye.
Eid Mubarak.
Alright guys, thanks for listening. So we'll see you on the next episode. Don't forget to give us a shout out on anchor.fm/the Halal Travel Podcast. Your voice message could be featured in our next episode.
Yup, and if you have any advertising and collaboration opportunities, contact us at info@halaltrip.com. That's info@halaltrip.com.
Also, don't forget to follow us on our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Halaltrip. We're also now on Telegram and TikTok. Until next time, get inspired, go and inspire others.